Paizo brings some favorite classes from 1st edition Pathfinder into 2nd edition through class archetypes in the new War of Immortals book. This is my last video in my series on the new book. Class archetypes are non-class classes. They're each a twist on a current class, and I talk about all 5 of them from this book in this video, plus a few bonus feats we get that are available to several martial classes. First, who am I? I am Ronald the Rules Lawyer. I'm a lawyer who runs tabletop role-playing games. My favorite system is Pathfinder 2e, and I, for 7 years, taught an after-school, middle school RPG class. Support my Patreon because it allows me to continue to make these videos. I don't make money as a lawyer. For more info on that, look at the video who's on the screen. And supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. Class archetypes. They were teased by Paizo as early as 2019 in the original core rulebook. But we haven't really seen them in action. We've had a couple here and there, so we haven't really seen class archetypes yet that are what was originally teased in 2019, that are a different take on a current class that modifies certain of its base class features. Now, a quick review on what class archetypes are. If you know 1st edition Pathfinder, it's like how archetypes worked then. You give a variant of an established class. And in Pathfinder 1e, classes were, compared to 2e at least, railroads. You get a list of features from 1 to 20. You still had choices within those classes, what eventually grew into the feats system in 2e. But they weren't nearly as modular as 2e classes are. In that context, archetypes, and there were dozens of them for each class, I feel, were the way you got customization within 1st edition. They switched out different features on that railroad. In 2e, that customization is now served by class feats, but the designers have reserved themselves the right to modify the base features of the class, which are not touched by class feats, through class archetypes. This apparently is for concepts that are like their own class, but don't fully justify its own class. There are several popular classes in 1st edition Pathfinder that arguably can be approximated already by current classes in 2nd edition. The 1st edition Brawler, for example, is a hybrid of the fighter and the monk. You arguably can already do that in a number of ways with current classes and archetypes. So how do they work mechanically? Strangely, since the remaster, we have not seen a good explanation of class archetypes. I actually have to get this language from the 2019 core rulebook. It alters some of your 1st level features, and you have to take the dedication at 2nd level. You can never have more than one class archetype. Now, despite what I've said, not every class archetype is stuck to one class. There are some class archetypes that can be taken by more than one class. The one that I know of is Flexible Spellcaster, which gives you D&D 5e style heightening. So this rule means that you cannot take the Seneschal Witch archetype that's in today's video and Flexible Spellcaster at the same time. Now, I'm actually not sure why this restriction exists. I personally think, unless there's something I'm not thinking about, that it's okay to get more than one class archetype so long as they don't substitute the same class features. I don't see any unintended interactions, at least from what's available to us currently. That, in fact, was the rule for mixing archetypes in 1st edition. I'll also comment here about how this interacts with the popular free archetype variant rule, the one that gives you a bonus feat every even-numbered level that must be devoted to an archetype feat. What this new book says about class archetypes is that you must take its dedication feat as your 2nd level class feat. That is different from your bonus archetype feat if you're using the free archetype variant. If you're going by this rules as written, this leads to an awkward situation where, because you cannot take a 2nd dedication feat without first getting 2 more feats in this archetype, you cannot take another dedication feat with your free archetype slot. This continues to level 4. I think tables should be fine to ignore this language here, if you're using the free archetype variant at least, and allow you to take a 2nd dedication at level 2. Alright, let's get on with the show. The first archetype is a rogue archetype called Avenger. This is a spiritual successor to the 1st edition's Slayer, which was a hybrid of the Rogue and the Ranger. In contrast to the Vindicators, who are another one of the class archetypes today, who are more subtle, churches may be less open about the existence of people like you. What's implied is that what you do is more unsavory. And when we look at your abilities, you are a killer. Alright, so you are a rogue, but different. You must have a deity, and you are proficient with their favored weapon. You don't have the surprise attack class feature, so enemies are not off guard to you if you were avoiding notice before combat started. You'll also gain the Hunt Prey action of the Rogue. It gives you bonuses to seek and track, and you also get to ignore a -2 range penalty if a foe is within your second range increment. It is less generous with skills. You have to take these 3 skills and get 3 plus your intelligence modifier, versus the base Rogue, which gets a huge number of skills. You have to take the Avenger Racket. The main advantage combat-wise, at least in these base features for the Avenger, is that you can deal sneak attack with a deity's favored weapon. Your key attribute can be strength, and you have medium armor proficiency. So you can wield a heavy polearm and do sneak attack damage with it, which you normally can't. That is normally confined to ranged weapons and weapons that have the agile or finesse traits, which usually do less damage. Additionally, if you critically succeed against a foe who is off guard to you, in addition to the sneak attack damage, you get the critical specialization effect, and this is at level 1. So in some ways, this is similar to the Ruffian Racket that already exists for the Rogue. However, that closed you off to weapons with higher damage dice, but this racket doesn't. Alright, important correction, I realized this while recording. They put out an errata saying that this sneak attack damage with your deity's favored weapon only happens if it is your hunted prey. So you need to spend an action to hunt prey, which you can also do before combat. Hunt prey, of course... What is this? Hello?
Hi, where's Sarah?
No, there's no Sarah. You have the wrong number.
Sorry.
Okay.
So, since they have you,
Bye. Since I have you on the phone, fuck you! So what does the Avenger Dedication feat give you? You get a bonus to saving throws against divine spells and effects that deal spirit damage. This could have been written more clearly. It's not clear whether this bonus is against divine spells that do not deal spirit damage. However, I would give it the more generous reading. You can use your religion skill in settlements that have a church dedicated to your god in dealing with NPCs to do things that basically are useful for getting at your prey. Now onto the feats, which I will not exhaustively cover today. I'm going to cover most of the feats today in this video. These videos have been a lot of work. I'll do my best to give a good sense of each archetype. One of the ways you can build your Avenger is to make your enemies doomed. That's the condition that lowers the dying value number that an enemy would die at. Zealous Inevitability lets you, once per turn, because it has the Flourish trait, make a strike against a foe with your deity's favored weapon, and if it hits, their doomed value increases by 1. And you might be thinking, wow, that sounds really strong. They die at doomed 4. However, when their doomed value would increase to 4, they get a will saving throw against your class DC, and at this point, the incapacitation trait applies. If they are higher level than you, they get to treat their degree of success as 1 degree higher. Additionally, the doomed value imposes a status penalty to their saving throws against divine spells. You're not a spellcaster, probably, but you probably have allies who are. There are other feats that are about leveraging the doomed condition you impose, leading up to this feat called Slay. It's a level 12 feat. If your target is doomed 2 or greater, you get to make a attack, 2 actions, that does extra precision damage, which apparently a basic fortitude save can alter the precision damage, which is unusual. And if they critically fail on that saving throw, they die. The death part has the incapacitation trait. You can only attempt this once against a particular creature in a given day. The section on the Avenger also introduces a couple of feats that are available to all rogues, fighters, and rangers. I'm going to deal with these bonus feats included in this book at the end of the video. But I'll say right now, they open up the possibility for the Avenger to treat a two-handed weapon as if you were wielding 2 different weapons, with the haft of your weapon being an agile offhand weapon. And it's at this time I'll point out that it's implied, also by the artwork, that the Avenger is a 2-weapon fighting class. The additional feats that you can take as an Avenger all have to do with 2-weapon fighting. The twin takedown feat is important to note. You get to attack your hunted prey 2 times with a single action, so long as you are wielding 2 weapons. It seems like the idea is to attack more than once on your turn with an offhand agile attack so that you can trigger your sneak attack damage more than once. One last feat I'll point out is Silence the Profane. You are a magic canceller. This is quite good. As a reaction, when an enemy casts a divine spell within your first range increment or within your reach, you get to strike them, and on a regular success, you disrupt the spell. They're also off guard for 1 round. The next archetype is for the Barbarian. It is the Bloodrager. In 1st edition Pathfinder, it was a hybrid of the Barbarian and the Sorcerer. It was a half-caster who was able to rage and also cast spells while raging, which normally wasn't allowed. And in 2e, it's only allowed with a small subset of spells that don't have the concentrate trait. The archetype here is not a direct translation. It's themed much more around blood, including drinking blood and harnessing the energy you get from the blood. Now, don't get too excited. This gives you the amount of spellcasting you'll expect from an archetype, which is not a whole lot. It's a small fraction of what you would get compared to what you would get if you were a base caster. Also, if you imagine your Barbarian harnessing nature and the elements while raging, the elemental instinct already exists for the Barbarian and does not require a class archetype. Alright, so what does being a Blood Rager change about your class features? Extremely little. It just changes your skills. Compared to the base Barbarian, one of your skills needs to be in medicine. It does mean you have to choose the Blood Rager instinct. When you rage, you do persistent bleed damage equal to half your additional damage from rage, which is going to be 1 at this level. By the way, your rage damage scales up the worst of all of the instincts. It goes from 2 to 4 to 8. I think that's balanced against you being able to do this persistent bleed damage in addition. You can also add your rage damage to spells that you cast. Angry spells, as long as it's a spell that has an attack roll. Interestingly, you apply your rage damage even on a failure. It doesn't say anything about a critical failure, by the way. So I expect it reflects your rage and fury that you're guaranteed to do the damage of that spell type regardless. I don't think your DPR is going to exceed those of other instincts, but you have more versatility with your damage types. At least when you get spellcasting, which you don't get at first level. By the way, the trick of doing a weapon attack and a spell that calls for a saving throw so that the multiple attack penalty doesn't apply does not synergize with this. It has to be a spell with a spell attack roll. Alright, so how does spellcasting work? Let's look at the dedication feat. You learn 2 cantrips. They must be from either the arcane or divine spell list, and that determines your spell list for this archetype. And at least one of these spells must be one that has a spell attack roll. You become trained in Arcana or Religion, depending on which spell tradition you took up. Your spellcasting attribute is Charisma. When you're raging, spells in your repertoire gain the Rage trait. That allows you to do them while raging. And FYI, especially after the remaster, you don't need to have a free hand to cast spells. However, whenever you cast a spell, you become drained 1, or it increases by 1. This probably means you're only going to be casting spells during combat because of the way you can lower your drained value, which is to harvest blood. If your last action was to do piercing or slashing damage with a melee strike against a creature not immune to bleed, they're bleeding, we assume, you consume the blood lingering on your weapon. You reduce your drained condition by 1 and get temporary hit points equal to your constitution modifier, and get a circumstance bonus against that creature's spells for a minute, at least until you harvest blood from a different creature. Note that this piercing or slashing damage must be from a melee strike. It cannot be caused by a spell like Gouging Claw. I'm going to note that this drained value you get when you cast spells can be leveraged for your benefit. So there's an interesting push-pull going on here when you cast spells. Alright, let's talk about some of the feats. At level 4, you can take Rising Blood Magic. This is your basic archetype feat that gives you access to lower rank spell slots. In addition, when you cast a spell and you are already drained, you increase the rage damage on that spell by 1. That extra damage increases when you get the other feats in the chain, improving your spellcasting. And it's the level 18 feat that gives you a bunch of extra spell slots. That's usually at lower level for most spellcasting archetypes. There is a way to get more spell slots as a Blood Rager, which we'll get to in a moment. Also, when you're drained too, your extra rage damage on a spell is doubled. So at this level, it will be plus 16 damage. This level 6 feat seems important, called Siphon Magic. You're lean on spell slots. If your last action was to harvest the blood of a creature that can cast spells, you can spend another action to regain a spell slot. It has to be lower than the highest rank of spells you can cast. This does increase your drained value, however. There's another feat where you further drink blood from a creature and add a spell to your repertoire for the day, depending on the creature type. That was interesting. The archetype references feats in other sources, and one that is not a surprise is Bespell Strikes, which this archetype can gain at level 8. If your most recent action was to cast a non-cantrip spell, as a free action, you get to infuse your weapon with that spell's energy and get extra damage to your next strike on this turn. So one common loop that happens for you is turn 1, you cast a spell which causes you to be drained 1. Then you Bespell Strike and make a strike. And then on turn 2, you can make a strike that does slashing or piercing damage, and then harvest blood to reduce that drain value. We have a level 10 feat, Hematocritical. This one stood out to me. If your last action was a strike that critically hit and they were not immune to bleed damage, you can, as a free action, bathe in the arterial fluids of your enemy. That sounds gross. If your next action is to cast a spell, you effectively have D&D advantage on it. You get to roll the attack roll twice and use the better roll. And if it calls for a saving throw, they have to roll twice and use the worse result. You likely want to do one that calls for a save because it's not affected by the multiple attack penalty. I've not done an analysis, but this is clearly a Gish class, and people are inevitably going to compare it to the Magus, which has the ability to spell strike and deliver a spell and its damage together with the damage of their strike. However, narrowing things to that, which may or may not hit, and is action intensive, doesn't take into account also the advantages you have as a barbarian, your greater hit points, and rage just got a buff in the remaster. Also, if one wants to compare this archetype to the other instincts that you can get as a barbarian, which likely do more raw damage, they don't match the Bloodrager in terms of versatility. Casting spells on its own expands your options. The next class archetype is a witch archetype called the Seneschal. You have lost your connection to your patron, and you're on your own. But you were also destined, if you can make it to level 20, to be a patron of other witches in your own right. Structurally, it's similar to the Godling Mythic Destiny, where you have a follower who's probably another party member, and then you get to assume this greater status at the end. Now, I looked up the word Seneschal online, and apparently it's someone who's an administrator or governor of affairs from medieval times. I guess the word choice reflects here that your patron has gone away, and so you're dealing with things on your own. All right, here are the basics and the changes to your class. You still select a patron, which gives you several benefits. It still determines your spell tradition, gives you a skill, and gives a special familiar ability when you do a hex spell. However, you lose the lesson from that patron, and what's the lesson? It's mainly the hex cantrip you get as a witch, as well as an extra spell added to your familiar. Here you get a free choice of a first rank spell added to your familiar, and you get the Manifest Will hex cantrip. Like most hex cantrips, it is one action and you sustain it up to a minute, and it creates a 10-foot emanation around you that has different effects depending on what spell tradition you have. Creatures that start their turn in your emanation are affected, and note that you can always exclude yourself from an emanation in this game. If you're an arcane caster, it gives a weakness to spell damage for a round. Divine gives temporary hit points for a round if they're living or undead. If you are a cult, symbols provide lesser cover to your allies that continues one round after they leave it. Primal imposes a speed penalty for a round as plants grasp at you. Now what happens at level 2? Basically, you get the Witch's Charge feat, which is normally a level 6 feat for witches. That's the one where you have a magical link with another creature that you designate during your daily preparations. Now, your version of this feat does not allow you to choose a minion, so you can't choose your familiar. You're always aware of them, where they are, and what conditions affect them. You can cast any touch spell on your charge so long as they are within 30 feet. And your Manifest Will hex cantrip can originate from your charge. So that's the core of this class archetype, and there are feats that further develop this relationship to your charge, whoever it is that morning. Seneschal Spell is a spell-shaped spell. To have a spell originate from your charge, they have to use their reaction. But for you, it has the subtle trait. That leads to some interesting possibilities where people will have no idea that you're a witch. A creative party could have fun with that. Or creative GM. Some other important feats are level 6, Multifaceted Will. When you do your hex cantrip, it can be any tradition's manifestation, and you can change it every time you sustain it as well. And also, all allies get a bonus on saves against spells of whatever tradition you chose. Unstable Patronage is a level 14 feat that lets you empower the charge to cast a spell so long as it's at least 2 ranks lower than your maximum rank. They get to cast it once a day, and it doesn't use any of your spell slots. The level 20 feat is Patron Reborn. You become patron. You gain dark vision and constant true sight, and you can see into all other transitive planes that overlap the one you are in. So that includes the ethereal plane. And also, you're a patron for other witches. Choose a type of patron you represent, and all witches who are allied with that patron, you get to treat them as charges. So all of the benefits we saw from feats apply to all witches of that patron. So you're also aware of all of them and what conditions affect them. Also, once per month, if one of your charges does the wish ritual, you can provide your knowledge, and it can be you who provides the skill check. The next class archetype allows a ranger to also be a religious enforcer. It's called the Vindicator. You are described as being a divine hunter going after the undead and supernatural, and evil religions can utilize Vindicators to root out heretics among their ranks. I would also add that you have a splash of the Investigator class in this class archetype. This is the spiritual successor of what is probably the most requested first edition class for 2E, the Inquisitor, which was a badass divine warrior who also was intimidating and pronounced judgments. From what we read earlier, you're apparently the more subtle counterpart to the Avenger. However, honestly, I'm not sure that's true, and I find it actually hard to distinguish the two archetypes in my head, because you're based on the Ranger chassis, whose point is about singling out and killing, well, usually killing, a single foe, while the Rogue has a lot of skills and skill feats. Anyway, I'll leave it to people in the comments to help me parse the difference between these two. I'll also say now that since they did not choose to base it in the Cleric, spellcasting is relatively limited compared to the 1E Inquisitor. What you get are focus spells that help you nail down a single foe. Many fans of the Inquisitor, I think, will not be happy. What we seem to have gotten was that the Slayer, which was a hybrid of the Ranger and the Rogue, got translated into these two archetypes, and the Inquisitor's religiosity was splashed onto both. However, this class archetype does seem to deliver on everything outside the spellcasting of the 1E Inquisitor, in my opinion, from first impression at least. Anyway, I'm coming up with a bunch of off-the-cuff comments that weren't in my original script plan. I'm just not sure how 2E would implement a half-caster. Anyway, those are my thoughts for now on a debate that I'm sure will rage in certain parts of the internet. Alright, here are the changes to the base Ranger. First, you must have a deity. Your required skill is not nature, it is religion. You are proficient in your deity's favored weapon. And if that's a simple weapon, you increase the die step by 1. Which, by the way, I'm not sure why the Avenger doesn't have that damage die step increase. I think that's standard for builds that rely on a favored weapon, so that it doesn't disfavor worshippers of a deities who happen to have a simple weapon as a favored weapon. Also, unlike the Avenger, if it's an advanced weapon, your proficiency with it improves as you level up. You must choose the Vindication Edge, so I'll talk about that now, and also about its focus spell that it gets, which are both key to what they do in combat. Remember, your edge is what you have against your hunted prey. You have to hunt prey first. You get a +1 status bonus to your spell attack rolls against your hunted prey, and they get a -1 on their saving throws. Those bonuses and penalties increase to 2 when you reach 17th level. Now here's the core of your class. It's this focus spell you get at level 1. It's called Vindicator's Mark. It's a 2-action spell that you attack your hunted prey with, who has to be within 60 feet. If it lands, you do spirit damage on that target, and there's a glowing nimbus of energy that only you can see. For the next minute, all of your weapon and unarmed strikes against that creature do +2 damage. When you hit with one of those attacks, your very next action can be to dismiss the spell and do 2d6 spirit damage to it. All these numbers scale up as you level up. Also, if your prey is an invisible creature, if you land this spell, they become only concealed to you. This is one of your Warden spells, and all of your Warden spells are divine instead of primal, by the way. The last change to your class features is, at level 5, your ability to automatically cover your tracks in nature can apply instead to urban terrain. It's your choice. Your level 2 dedication feat, which of course is mandatory, is very similar to the Avenger feat, but it seems a little better. You get to use your religion skill in settlements where there's a church dedicated to your deity, but you get a +2 circumstance bonus if it is a worshipper of your deity or your hunted prey. And the actions you can do include making an impression and making a request, which is interesting to me. You can hunted prey on someone who's not an enemy, someone you just want to impress and make requests of. Here are the additional feats that you can take with this archetype, Importantly, we have the feats that give you a domain and domain focus spells. We also have a couple of investigator feats and a thaumaturge feat also that lets you strike a foe and recall knowledge about the foe when you hit. There's also a new level 6 feat here that is very similar to what interrogation investigators get. For them, it's called the pointed question action, where you kind of force somebody to answer and speak the truth, or try to force them. However, unlike the remastered investigator, it doesn't make them off guard, unfortunately. We have another feat that resembles an Avenger feat. This one is to cancel spellcasting. However, this has a couple key differences. The creature does not need to cast a spell that is divine. Also, if you successfully strike them, they're not off guard as a result. It still disrupts the spell, of course. At level 10, we get another key feat. This one gives you the Vindicator's Judgment focus spell. One action on your hunted prey, they make a fortitude save, and you can impose weakness 5 to all your strikes and damage from your divine spells for the next minute. This weakness scales at higher levels. The last feat is Call the Hunt, a level 12 feat that is reminiscent of the Rogue's Gang Up feat. You instruct your allies on how best to defeat your prey. With an action, you make your hunted prey off guard to all melee attacks so long as you and one of your allies have it within your melee reach. This lasts until the start of your next turn. And this part's cool. If you are sanctified, then all of the strikes by you and your allies are sanctified against your hunted prey. So you can give a collective holy or unholy beatdown on a foe. The last class archetype is a fighter archetype, the Warrior of Legend. You are an indomitable warrior, but you also have a weakness, and you are tempting your own demise and your own death. You also fight with a polearm or a spear, and I'm not familiar a lot with classical myths and tales, but I imagine this is the tale of Achilles. However, this archetype disfavors shields, so I'm not sure. Maybe someone in the comments will educate us. Alright, so what changes does this make to being a fighter? First, I have to point out that it says, a curse foretells your inevitable fall, and I was like, damn, you're being told you're going to lose. What a depressing sentence. I have to think that players with this archetype are not as fatalistic. You lose heavy armor proficiency, and you don't gain the shield block feat. You get both acrobatics and athletics instead of just one of them. At level 5, when you choose a weapon group to get master proficiency in, you get that for spears and polearms, and that is chosen for you. You can't choose outside of those. And here's the core mechanic. You choose one physical damage type, whether that be bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing, and you gain weakness to that damage type equal to half your level, minimum 1. Whenever you take damage of that type, you become doomed to 2. The dying value at which you would die lowers by 2. However, you get the Die Hard feat as a bonus feat. So you normally would die at dying 5 now, since you have Die Hard, but if you take the bad damage, you die at dying 3. Thankfully, more damage does not increase your doomed value. Now, this just sounds bad, but let's look at the dedication feat, because you can leverage this to your advantage. As long as you are not wearing heavy armor or wielding a shield, and you are wielding a spear or polearm, it gains the parry trait. You can use an action to give yourself an AC bonus, and if it already had the parry trait, its bonus increases to +2. Additionally, you deal an additional amount of damage equal to your doomed value with spears and polearms. So the moment you take the bad damage, let's keep calling it that, you get +2 damage on your strikes. So you're basically getting the bonus damage from Barbarian Rage, but you don't have to spend an action to do it, you just have to get hurt. And I'm wondering if some groups might want to take that literally and have you punch yourself or have an ally punch you in order to trigger your bonus damage. I don't know if I would allow that as a GM. It's up to every table. The level 4 feat, Heroic Defiance, lets you gain temporary hit points and get a +1 status bonus to all your saving throws for a minute when you gain the Doomed condition. You can only do this once per 10 minutes and it uses a reaction. Notably, this is the only level 4 feat available for this class archetype. The only level 6 feat we have is Clear the Way. That is from the Mauler archetype. That's the two-handed weapon archetype. That's the one that lets you shove several creatures and stride up to half your speed. The other additional feat, Unbalancing Sweep, is similar. It allows you to shove and trip foes who are surrounding you. Here are some of the remaining feats. I'll just mention that there are some feats I won't show that protect you from your increased Doom condition. Spear of Doom is a level 10 feat, and it is dramatic. If a foe did the bad damage to you within the last round and you are still doomed, you can spend an action to brace yourself for a battle that will see you either live to fight another day or die a legend. You enter the Spear of Doom stance. While in the stance, your weakness to the bad damage doubles to equal your full level. However, anytime that foe succeeds on an attack against you, you get to, as a reaction, attack them. You can strike them as a reaction. And you get a bonus reaction per turn that can only be used for this reaction or for your reactive strike reaction so long as it's on the same opponent. This sounds particularly effective against a foe that does not rely on melee strikes. The next feat that I'll show is Only My Doom May Claim Me. What a dramatic name. A level 14 feat. This is interesting in that you gain resistance equal to half your level for the good damage types. So you have this huge contrast. You have resistance, at this point, resistance 7 to 2 damage types, but weakness 7 to 1 damage type. It makes damage types matter a lot more and makes playing this class archetype feel more unique. All right, lastly, I'll cover the new feats that don't require taking any of these class archetypes to take. Printed with the Avenger was Halved Striker Stance. This can be taken by any rogue, fighter, or ranger, which lets you treat a two-handed weapon so long as it's a hammer, spear, or polearm as if you are two-weapon fighting. It lets you use the haft of that weapon as an agile offhand weapon that does 1d4 bludgeoning damage and is in the club group. It shares the fundamental runes of the main weapon, but not the property runes. It takes an action to enter this stance, and while you're in this stance, you get to use feats and abilities that normally require that you wield 2 melee weapons, each in a different hand. So this works with a fighter's double slice. Also, the ranger's twin takedown feat. However, when you enter this stance, you're making a choice. You cannot use abilities that require that you use a two-handed weapon. Meanwhile, this is a stance, so you want to be mindful about competing with other stances. This is a prerequisite for Halved Beatdown, a level 10 feat. You spend 3 actions. You can only do this once per minute. You hit a poor soul with both the main side of the weapon and the haft at your full accuracy. And then you strike 2 times again, and I think those last strikes are at your full multiple attack penalty. We also are shown 2 feats together with the Warrior of Legend archetype, but these can be taken by any fighter. There's Spear Dancer, which is reminiscent of the rogue feat Skirmish Strike. If you're wielding a spear or a polearm, you get to step and strike or strike then step. This next one is cool. It's called Needle in the God's Eyes. Spend 2 actions to leap your speed either horizontally or vertically, and you get to make 2 strikes on the way, either on the way up or on the way down, on different targets or on the same target. Pretty spectacular. And you make both attacks with the same accuracy. So that covers the class archetypes and the new feats in War of Immortals, and this concludes my coverage of the book. I'm excited by this book, especially by the Animus and Exemplar, which they did a proper play test of and look like very exciting, solid classes to play to me. Unlike the Mythic rules, which while I find exciting and I would probably try to run as written at first if I were to run them at one of my tables, I see them more as a toolbox that every table should feel free to customize for their own needs, to juice up their campaigns however they see fit. I don't have much to add. You should watch the videos in my War of Immortals playlist, which I'll link to in the video description if you haven't yet. Do consider supporting my Patreon, as I rely much more on Patreon than YouTube ad revenue. Besides that, I'm finally done with this series of videos, and it's time to celebrate.